That is the essence of Hollywood filmmaking, of great Hollywood filmmaking, lay in the convergence between strong personalities and the structures and limitations of genre filmmaking. But there are some filmmakers, some directors, and even screenwriters too, who are able, in a sense, to take those structures and limitations and make them part of their personality, often in the process transforming those genres into new expressions. Two artists, I think, were like that, were Howard Hawks and Alfred Hitchcock. We're very fortunate to have here a third with us tonight, Mr. Boetticher.
You're going to do a dirty trick. She's going to sit over there, and this is the farthest we've been apart for the last 10 years.
Can you hear me in the back? Oh, this is fine. You know, when I was at the British Film Institute, which is the only other place I've ever been, and I'm really having a good time here, and thank you for asking me. I was introduced by Jim Kitsis, who did a very pretentious book on me, if you hadn't met. And I arrived in London. Now we're very good friends. And he realized after about 4 or 5 days that what he had written wasn't at all what I am. And he started out on the wrong foot because he got up and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I will introduce you to the man who will tell you all about Westerns." And I started to laugh, and I said, "Jim, wait a minute, cut." I said, "If John Ford were here, he wouldn't be able to tell you all about Westerns." And I said, "This is like asking somebody in a half an hour to tell you all about bullfighting, or speaking to a bunch of atheists, and you say, 'I've got 15 minutes to tell you all about Catholicism.'" I said, "Wouldn't it be a lot nicer if we all became friends?" It's a 2,000-seat auditorium. And I've heard so many directors, I'm not being critical, but I've been bored by them, who tell you for 2 hours what they've done. And 90% of the time, you're not at all interested in hearing what they've done. You want to ask them some questions. So obviously we're friends, or you wouldn't be here, unless we're really enemies and you came to boo the picture. So I would like you to ask me what you'd like to know about this particular picture, and I hope you stick around for Arruza, because we can really talk after that one. And I can answer your questions, and I think the questions will undoubtedly lead to a story or something about Hollywood that might interest you. And it's a lot better rapport that we'll have than me sitting up here and saying, "And then I wrote," because I don't think any of the pictures, with the exception of Arruza, are as good as the ones I hope to make in the future. And I was telling an interviewer today that any time a director or a writer feels that he's really satisfied, he better quit, because he's not going anyplace. So if you'd ask me some questions, if you're interested, I'll be very happy to ask them. And incidentally, if any of your questions are very personal, Mary knows all about me, and that's why we have such a great marriage. Every time they would mention somebody else at the British Film Institute, everybody would look at Mary. So I had to say, wait a minute, I was married to this young lady and that young lady, and it takes a little while and a lot of experimentation to hit the jackpot. So I'm very happy now. We don't have to worry about personality. So what do you have in mind? Yes.
Why in the 1950s did you choose to make a series Western? What did you do?
Well, no. Actually, I hadn't made many Westerns, and certainly not good ones. And it's very interesting that you would ask that. I made the Scott pictures, which really established a reputation, which certainly wasn't there until I made them, so that I could shoot Arruza. Because I was making big pictures then, lousy big pictures at Universal, when I had 80, 90-day schedules, and they were dreadful. And I still hold the world's record at Universal, and I'm not very proud of it. I made 9 major pictures in 2 years, and I didn't have time to breathe. And Kathy Jurado told me one day, she said, you're making pictures like tortillas. And I said, yeah, they're just about as flat. But at any rate, and they were expensive, but you just can't do much at that particular studio. Any studio that teaches everybody in the world how they make pictures has got to be bad for the industry. So at any rate, I decided that I would surround myself with a great A-picture crew. I'm very sorry that you saw the picture in sepia, because it wasn't shot like that. Years go by and we all get a little older. But William Clothier is a great cameraman, and this picture originally was just gorgeous. And I'm sorry you saw it like that. But at any rate, we decided that we would make these pictures in 3 weeks, which we did. We never went over 18 days. And it's very interesting because you can't make a mistake. At least you don't set out to make a mistake. And we had all, I had Pev Marley, I had always Lucian Ballard whenever he was available, who will always be with me in my future. And we would make these pictures with great scripts from Bert Kennedy. And I made them so that at the end of a picture, if I wanted an hour and 23 minutes, I had an hour and 30 minutes. And we would go clip, 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 and in a week the picture was cut, which picture should be. You shouldn't be that insecure that you go down the street one side and then down the other and sit for 6 months and figure which shots you want. So then I could go to Mexico and shoot another bullfight. And we would go and shoot. I shot 18 bullfights on Arruza, which ultimately became 11 hours of edited film, not 11 hours of exposed negative. And that's 15 minutes in a montage in the picture that I hope you stay and see. But then I would come home and make another Randolph Scott picture and love it. And then I would go to Mexico and shoot another bullfight or two. And suddenly I began to realize that we were doing something quite differently. We were making heroes out of the villains. And if any of you have followed this renowned series, you'll find that, and I'll tell you a secret, in Ride Lonesome, the villain, Pernell Roberts, was supposed to die. And I finally called Harry Joe Brown at Columbia, and I said, Harry, I'm not going to kill him. He said, well, yeah, they have to. I mean, come on, we always kill the villains. I said, not this one. He said, well, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to let him live. I said, I've been trying to make pictures for years that if somebody killed Randy Scott, you wouldn't care a hell of a lot, I mean, the other guy's cuter. And Randy didn't care because there's a big difference between John Wayne and Randolph Scott. Of course, Duke produced a couple of pictures of mine, and we were very good friends and deadly enemies, which always makes a good combination. And Randy would say, and the reason we were allowed to make stars, and we did, look at the group. I mean, Lee Marvin, Richard Boone, Pernell Roberts, Craig Stevens, they all went into series one after the other. And Randy said one day, he said, what was the name of that fellow in the red underwear, that skinny boy that we did that scene with today? And I said, I think his name is James Coburn. He said, he's a fine boy. He said, let's give him some more lyrics. So we sat up all night and wrote a scene, and he was so good the next day doing the scene in Ride Lonesome with Pernell that I cut it together and sent it to John Sturgis, and that's how he got Magnificent Seven. So now, this year, Jim and I are going to make my picture Khalifa. Our producer, Mr. K. Alexander, is back there now, flew in from Los Angeles to say hello. Okay, will you stand up and... There comes a time in Hollywood, and it has arrived, when you can pick your producer, and I'm damned if I'm going to work with somebody I don't like. So we're very good friends. At any rate, that's the answer to the question, and suddenly we had accumulated, with the exception of Westbound, 6 pretty good pictures. 5 they recognize today as, and I love the word because you wait all your life to see it written, classics. And Westbound I put aside because Westbound was the 3rd picture. And Randy had one more picture to do at Warner Brothers under his contract, as I did with Legs Diamond. And you try to get out of the studio if you have any honor at all. And I didn't want somebody over there to take a dreadful script that wasn't written by Bert Kennedy. And this is cocky, wasn't directed by me, and maybe ruined a career that was budding again. And those are the 7 pictures that I made while I was filming the action sequences in Arruza. So you get a long answer if you just ask a question. Yes?
What was the budget of your movie for this period, or this movie in particular?
7 Men From Now. Now, when you hear these budgets, you'll be shocked. Because this is the way to make pictures. Naturally, you can't do it now because of the unions and the guilds and all of the other baloney you have to go through. But there's certainly not a reason to spend $41 million. When I was making dreadful pictures as Oscar Boetticher Jr., and somebody said one day, when did you realize you were a director? I said, after I directed about 10 of them. As a matter of fact, and we'll get to the budget, the first picture I made was a Boston Blackie at Columbia with Chester Morris, and you couldn't direct Chester Morris because he'd made 35 Boston Blackies, and when he went through a door, and I would say, would you turn right? He said, no, I always turn left. So the picture was reviewed And the Hollywood Reporter says, and this has become a classic, and I love it because I have it at home, it says this picture wasn't released, it escaped. So I figured you had to go up from there, you couldn't go down. But those pictures were $100,000, those 8-day wonders of Colombia, and they were only there for a filler on a double bill while people ate popcorn, and if they missed the beginning of the main feature. So when I was in my 20s, I started directing when I was 24, and was very lucky. And the only reason in the world that I became a director was Harry Cohn knew I could throw a good left hook, and he figured I could protect myself, try to make these pictures, and I got a job. So right after Cover Girl. But the Scott pictures were budgeted. These were $500,000, no more. And I mean, they were budgeted so tight that if we went $501,000, they'd pull the plug. But I did something that was sort of clever. I never got in a studio, so they couldn't pull a plug. They could make the sun go down, maybe, but they couldn't stop the show. But they came in at $500,000. I think with the Warner 40% overhead, maybe 7 Men from Now cost $400,000, but that was a couple of years earlier. Today, Mr. Alexander and I are struggling to make a $3.5 million picture for $3.5 million. You won't believe it. The budgets go up and up and up, and I'll tell you a story on what's wrong with Hollywood. I met a gentleman a few weeks ago in Hollywood, and I thought I had a 2-picture deal with him. Actually, it was a couple of months ago. I tried to shut him out of my mind. And I went up to Hollywood, which I never do. We don't live there. My wife and I raised very fancy horses about 45 minutes in from San Diego at the San Diego Country Estates. We just left Hollywood for a while. Now it's coming back. But I walked in the office, and I thought I had a 2-picture deal with this man. And we sat down. He was very cordial. His mother is a great writer and a friend of mine, a very old lady and a very famous woman. This man was an attorney. And he said, I read your 2 scripts. And I said, did you like them? And he said, no. So I got up, and he said, where are you going? I said, what am I doing here? This is absurd. He said, well, aren't you interested why I don't like your scripts? And I said, no, because if you don't like them, you're wrong. They're wonderful scripts. And he said, well, let me tell you why. I said, I'm not interested. He said, please let me tell you why. If I don't budget a picture for $10 million, I don't get all of my money back and retain my percentage before the picture starts. And I said, you SOB, and I'm cleaning this up for you. I said, you're what's wrong with Hollywood today, and it's absurd. Somebody else might think of something. Yes?
Given the fact that it's so expensive to make a picture that B-movies aren't being made and great as they used to be, have somebody who wants to direct begin directing on feature films.
Well, you're mistaken about one thing. B-movies are being made consistently in Hollywood today, and they cost $41 million. It's very difficult today. Let me tell you how I became a director, and it's very tough on young guys. I was an athlete in college, and I came up as technical director on Blood and Sand, and I worked with Ruben William, and now we're great friends. And I watched him as I have other Hungarian directors, and they were very, very tough on people. And I thought, as I watched him, there was a bell on his left side of his chair that rang for me. I was the technical director, and I had to come around and be right in focus in front before he would speak to me. And there was one on the right that rang for Robert Webb, who was the unit manager who later became a director and did wonderful things. And he would come around and Ruben would talk. And I said, there must be a way that people can be nice to people. You're so lucky if you become a director, or a star, or an acknowledged writer, or a producer, or anything that is important, where people like you say it's important, not what you buy. And it's very difficult today. So at any rate, after Cover Girl, which was the only picture in the history of Hollywood that at that time that went $1.5 million over $1 million budget, so we were all fired. And I was in Mexico, and Charles Vito was in disgrace, and he was a brilliant, brilliant director. And I got a call from Harry Cohn. Now, the 2 toughest men who ever lived in Hollywood, and you have to know this is true, were my best friends. They were really my godfathers, John Ford and Harry Cohn. And I called one of them Jack and one of them Harry, and John Wayne called Ford Coach, and everybody else called Mr. Cohen, Mr. Cohen. So he called me in the office, and he said, Bud, I'm going to lose my power at Columbia. Irving Briskin and Sam Briskin of the Briskin unit at Columbia have 3 directors, Mel Ferrer, who failed as a director, Henry Levin, who didn't, and Bill Katzo, who I loved, who made the wonderful horror pictures, was the other one. He said, I don't have a director. Can you direct? And I was intelligent enough to lie, and I said, yes. So they put me on the first picture, and that's how I became a director, and that's how I got that wonderful review I spoke to you about. So then an interesting thing happened. They allowed me, why I don't know, to make a second picture. I guess Harry told him, let the kid alone. So I made a picture called, with Jordan. What was it, Jim? You told me now. And it was a pretty good picture. But before this, I had read 3 wonderful reviews from Mel Ferrer and Henry Levin and Bill Castle. So I went to these guys, and we had a meeting on the mound, and I said, come here, fellas, I made a lousy picture, and you guys made 3 lousy pictures, and you got great reviews, and they told the truth about me. What's going on in Hollywood? I didn't know this. They said, well, don't you know? I said, don't you know what? They said, well, you buy a case of scotch, and you buy a case of bourbon, and you split them in half, and you send one to the variety and one to the reporter, about a month before the reviews come out. So I did it. I think I was making $250 a week, working myself to death. And I took the $250 and I bought 2 cases of liquor. You can't do this anymore. I wouldn't be able to tell the story. I'd tell the story to you guys. But anyway, about 2 months went by and I'd forgotten about all this money. I now was eating again. I recouped some of my finances. And I picked up the Morning Reporter and Variety, and it said, Columbia's White Hope, Bud Betty, Oscar Bettiker Jr. scores again. And I really walked around the office and I said, boy, they're right, I'm really a tiger. And all of a sudden, I got sick in my stomach, and I've never done it again. I've never spent another nickel on publicity. But for a young man to become a director today, it is easier in a way because you have the opportunity of television, which we didn't have. When I became a director, I was very young and very dumb and very, very lucky. And there was no way to become a director unless you had someone like Harry Cohn to give you a boost, and always with your friends. Take what they give you. There isn't anyone in Hollywood who has made a success that really did it his way. That's a lot of baloney. You had to have a friend or a sweetheart or a beau or something that helped you, and then you should be prepared. It's like being a heavyweight fighter. If you're a second-rate fighter, maybe the other guy will get hurt, and you're in with Cassius Clay or Holmes, and you never know, so you better keep in shape. When you get the opportunity, no matter how bad you think you are, don't turn it down, because all you can do is fail and you'll be right back in the same position anyway. But you might have an opportunity to succeed. But in those days, directors were 40 and 45 years old when they had the opportunity to become directors. And usually they came from the stage, occasionally they were cameramen, never were assistant directors. The reason I don't go to the Screen Directors Guild meetings, which they now call it the Directors of the World or something, they used to have directors. Now they have second assistants, first assistants, unit managers, and all your enemies. Now I can say that because I was assistant director. And the assistant director is the guy that goes to the producer and tells him how you're screwing up his picture. So that's a misnomer. They shouldn't be assistant directors, and they should have their own guild with the producers where they belong, and they do a great job. I have friends like Tommy Shaw, there's nobody better, who's now with Houston all the time, and we have great romances. But the people who make the motion pictures are the writers and the directors and the producers and the cameramen. And very few producers contribute a hell of a lot because they used to be relations. And now they're businessmen. And the unfortunate thing, this is why I'm with Mr. Alexander, because he's bright and smart and young and tough. And he has a black belt, and I'm not sure I can lick him, which is a big handicap. But at any rate, it's very tough to answer your question, and you just have to keep trying and studying. And I wish that I'd had the opportunity to learn what you people do in these schools. We didn't have any schools. They just threw us a script and said, shoot it. And we tried. Yes?
I have a little question. Why do the cowboys, why they kill more Indians than people kill cowboys? In this movie, they had no trouble being free Indians.
Well, I think that, let me answer one at a time. I think if we had lost the people the Indians were shooting at, the picture would have been finished in the first 15 minutes. Those are falling horses, and they're great trick horses. And they used to have things called flying W's. Now, as I say, Mrs. Boetticher and I have some fabulous horses. As a matter of fact, we're Portuguese Andalusians, and there are 35 in the country. We have 28, and we've sold 6. There just aren't any. So we love horses. And this used to frighten me a great deal. They used to put wires there. And when you see the great George Stevens pictures of the cavalry in Europe, and all of a sudden 20 horses hit a wire and they all fall, that was brutal. Today, the stuntmen are so great that they train the horses on the sand dunes. And what they do is you take a rope, left or right, according to which way your horse favors. All horses are left-handed and right-handed, and they go one way or the other way easier. And we say, if they'd rather go to the right, they're stiff on the left side, so you're going to fall them to the right. And you take a rope, a cloth rope, and when the horse has his lead out and pulls it back, you just hold the rope, and he falls into the sand dune, and he doesn't get hurt. But at the same time, you put this spur in, and you do that 100 times, and all you do is go along and put this spur in, and the horse will fall. And one day, Buzz Henry was a great friend of mine. Most of the stuntmen we're all pals. This is my society. And I was riding on the trails at the Griffith Park, and I was on an Andalusian, and Buzz Henry was on his falling horse, and he'd been drinking quite a bit the night before. And he accidentally put the falling cue in and splattered right in the middle of, I said, Buzz, you just blew $1,500, So they're really well trained. They can do anything.
Well, the third thing, something I always wanted to know, who really is responsible for this weapons for people, not being realistically shot. It's all blood,
Well, I think Sam Peckinpah has given you more blood than 2 or 3 wars. But, and I also don't think that you have to put liver in somebody's mouth and spit it out to show that he's dead. But, and don't misunderstand me, several of Mr. Peckinpah's pictures I admire very much. But it's very difficult to kill somebody the way people are really killed. I was in the war, and I saw people being killed, and I've seen people killed in the bull ring, and I've come very close myself, much closer to the bull ring than in the war. But it's hard to do it because it's very messy. People do not die in real life like they die on the screen. I am proud of only one death in all the pictures I made. When you see a killer is loose, and you see that man, John Lodge, who was in this picture, get shot through the bottle of milk, which was a squib, and the milk bottle blew up, you have a feeling that a bullet went through his stomach. It's very difficult to do, but they're doing it very well now on good television shows. It's up to the director. The word director has really faded, so, with a few exceptions, in Hollywood. There aren't a lot of directors. They don't have the prestige they used to have. They're not the tyrants they used to be. And they certainly don't have the respect. And there are too many people mixing the soup. And they can't make the pictures on their own. And I've been asked for the last 2 days why I left Hollywood. And, of course, I'm delighted to say that now we're back. We're never going to be in Hollywood. We're going to make a picture a year because the 5 pictures I wrote, 4 screenplays and a book in the last 10 years, and they're all going to be made one after the other in the next 5 years. And by the time I'm sure that I'm going to live another 5 years, I will probably have written another script, and maybe I can get into year 6. But at any rate, you have to be very, very particular, and the only way to make good pictures is to know that it's going to be great. Now, it may not be, but damn it, if you know it's going to be great, and you have the talent to make it great, and it's just good, you're way ahead of the 200 bad pictures that are being made alongside you. Yes?
Did you have some association with the mules for Sister Sarah, the Don Siegel picture? I wonder if you could...
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. John Ford called me one night before he died, and he said, I just saw a piece of crap on television. Did you make it? And I said, no, Jack. He said, well, your name was there, and I thought you might have written and directed it, too. And I said, you know damn well I didn't direct it. And I said, well, wait a minute. Don Siegel did it, and he's a great director, and he's a dear, dear friend of mine. I said, this picture was produced in the shape it was. I wrote 2 news for Sister Sarah in Mexico while I was filming Arruza as my comeback picture. And my nun was a nun. And you didn't find out that she was a courtesan, not a hooker, until the last 2 minutes of the picture. And I wrote it for Bob Mitchum and Sylvia Pinal. You may have seen Viridiana. Now, stop and think, what leading lady could you have with someone like Sylvia Pinal, an unknown in this country? Because with all due respect to our leading ladies, you can't use Ava Gardner. They're not going to believe that. You certainly couldn't have used Lana Turner. You can't use Liz Taylor. The two great nuns had already been done, Audrey Hepburn and Deborah Carr. So if I had had a stupid girl playing the part who was a big name, who could act, I wouldn't have told her till the end of the picture that she wasn't a nun. And the reason the picture upset me so, in my script, now, I'm on the writer's side now, and I'll tell you, that's a very touchy thing, because there isn't a writer in the world that doesn't think you're screwing up his art. So when you're screwing up your own art, you can get away with it. Now I'm a writer-director, and I'm the only one that sits and looks at the movies and says, wow, that's awful. Oh, I like it. But I wrote the script, and I made a deal with Gustavo Electricity in Mexico to produce the picture. And I think it would have been beautiful. And when my leading man, who would have been Mitchum or someone like him, sees this semi-naked girl who's about to be raped and destroys the three fellas, and she gets dressed because it's getting cold and she's in a nun's habit, I wanted him to believe, and the audience to believe, that this girl was a nun. Now, at this particular stage, she's unshaven, she's holier than thou, and the first time she picks her knapsack off her duffel bag off the mule, first time he does it, it goes up in the air, and he said to her, expecting it to be heavy, he says, sister, you ain't carrying much. And she says, nothing of value. And he says, not even nothing to eat? And she says, the Lord will provide. And he says, sister, the only things the Lord provides out here is sand and rocks, and you can't eat them. And she says, he provided you. And he says, oh, But she was really a nun, and as the picture was to progress, she got holier, and he shaved, and he fell in love with the only unobtainable woman in his whole life. And he doesn't find out until the last 2 minutes of the picture that this woman was available to him all the time, but she had to get across the border in Chihuahua, from Chihuahua, to escape, and then she was going to tell him. But I had a fair play clause, and a writer who became a producer produced that picture at Universal, and he had been a writer for me. And we met, he came on the set one day and didn't know who I was. When I was very young, he was looking for the director. And he said, what's the boy genius thought up today? And it was sarcasm, and so we didn't become great friends. And so we never had a great relationship. And he got the picture, and I had a fair play clause, and I had to either come home and leave Arruza, which was the love of my life, because it's really honest. There's nothing funny about this picture you're going to see. And they sent me my money. And I stopped eating tortillas for a couple of months and made steaks again and lost the picture. But I must tell you, Don Siegel is a dear friend of mine. And I sat in front of him. Now, I love Shirley MacLaine. You know, when you talk about The Apartment, when you name all of her great pictures. But Shirley was not the lady to play a nun in a picture when she was supposed to be a nun. So they said, we're not going to get away with this, so let's let her smoke cigars and drink liquor, which Clint never smelled on her breath. He was the dumbest guy in the whole audience. And also, when he threw the dynamite, and I saw him walk down to pick up the dynamite where the fuse is burning. I was sitting with Ron Ely, who was one of my dearest friends next to me, and we were together in Mexico. He was doing Tarzan when I was doing Arruza. And he said, why don't you turn around and hit him? I said, wait a minute. So when he walked down to pick up the dynamite, because he read on the next page that it didn't explode, I said, I don't believe this picture. My guy ran in, slid in third base. The umpire said he's safe. He grabbed it, chewed it out, spit it out, and stopped on it, you know. Who says it's not going to explode? So I knew we were lost then. And then when they finally got to the 2 mules for Sister Sarah, none of them could figure what the hell the other mule was. So they put her on a bull. The 2 mules for Sister Sarah were the leading man and the mule. So, you know, that's a touchy point with me. When you see me turn a little red, you'll know why. Anyway, Don called the next morning because I didn't stay for the cocktail party. And he said, thank you for not leaving last night. That was very kind. I said, Don, why'd you make the picture that way? He said, well, it's a wonderful thing, Bud, to wake up every week and know there's a check in the mail. And there was a long pause. And he said, boy, I'm talking to the wrong guy. And I said, Donald, you sure as hell are, because it's much better to wake up every morning and shave and not be ashamed of what you see in the mirror. So that's a very sad point to me, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I got it off my chest, and now I'll enjoy the rest of the evening.
Excuse me, we have to start Arruza at 7:30, but we'll be back after Anthony's work lesson.
You see how timely that was? I was going to ask that question myself.
Would you please welcome again the maker of this remarkable film, Mr. Boetticher.
You know, for your students, it's a wonderful thing when you're moved with a picture that you cut and you see for 1,000 times. Once in your life you make one like that. I didn't make this motion picture for non-aficionados. And when some of you who don't even like bullfighting like it and appreciate it, it makes you want to cry. And I'll tell you another thing that's very important to young filmmakers. Don't ever sit in the back of the theater like I do and not just die when somebody walks out. Because when you stop caring, you're not going to do very well. And I do want to thank all of you for coming. It's a great pleasure to be in Chicago. The two reviews we've gotten by Larry Cart and David Kerr are two of the nicest things that have ever been written about me. I don't know where they found out how I think, because I've never said I didn't want to live Hollywood's life. I didn't want to go to cocktail parties. We just didn't do those things. I didn't want to say to anybody that the reason I made smaller pictures was only because I had control of them. And I didn't want to make $41 million pictures where they would take them away from me. Just so you know, when the music starts in 7 Men from Now, and all those idiots come on and sing 7 Men, I die. That was done after I left the picture, and I never did it again. I don't know where they came from. I think somebody owed them money. But motion pictures are very, very personal, and I care very much about it. Mary and I walked away 10 years ago, and now we have 5 films to do. I hope 6, I hope 10. But each picture will be made with this devotion that I had to this picture. It wasn't that Carlos Arruza was my best friend, because also he was my worst enemy. We really fought. He retired, as Tony Quinn said, 13 years before we got him back in the plaza. And he used to say to me, "You are going to kill me because I retired as the number 1, and now I cannot go back and be the number 2 or the number 3. And he was a most charming guy. As a matter of fact, I told a lovely interviewer this afternoon, a lady who really knew what she was talking about. She asked me about Carlos's personality, and I said if the man had wanted to be a brain surgeon, he would have been one of the finest in the world, whatever he set out to do. And I told her a very funny story I think you'll appreciate. Arruza couldn't play chopsticks on the piano. He really couldn't do it at all. His fingers got all mixed up. So he went out and he spent a fortune. This is the kind of guy he was. And he went to one of the great music masters of Latin America, Chavez. And he learned to play La Virgen de la Macarena, which is the wonderful piece they play just before a bullfight. He would go boom, boom, da 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 da, boom, 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 boom. And he learned to play it perfectly. That's all he could do. He couldn't go to rum, boom, 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 but he could play the hell out of his picture. So at all parties, he would station himself by the piano. And the girls would come over, as they always did, and they would say, Don Carlos, do you play the piano? No, I don't play the piano. Well, you seem to love music. Well, I stand here because it's comfortable. Well, can you play anything? Well, I can do a little bit. And he would sit down and kill everybody and then quit because he couldn't play anything else. But that's the kind of fella that he was. And I had made Bullfighting and the Lady, which you may want to see tomorrow. And it's a story of an American boy, and I think it taught bullfighting to the United States, because never before in motion pictures in this country could you associate with the torero? Because when Tyrone Power is talking to John Carradine, they can't say one to the other, that's a fighting bull. The other one's got to say, are you kidding? You know, two baseball players are going to say they run first base and then second and then third, or we punt on fourth down. But an American could ask Gilbert Rowland, who was a combination of my two great instructors, who were two of the top bullfighters in the world, Lorenzo Garza and Arruza, he could ask these questions. And like the last half hour of this film, you don't have to know a hell of a lot about bullfighting to appreciate it. And that's why there's no narration until Carlos is killed. And when you get to the end of Bullfighter and the Lady, you understand what it's all about because the questions that you were going to ask have already been answered, and it was a trick. I'm very proud of this picture. I know a lot of you have never seen a bullfight and may never care to see it again. But you have seen perfection as far as this gentleman was concerned.
He was a delightful man, and the lady who interviewed me today said a very lovely thing. She said, you know, in a way, and she said, this is terrible, but you must be sort of glad that he died when he did at the height of his career. And I said, well, Jack Kennedy did, and various other people did, and we never saw them old. You know, we never saw them get fat. We never saw them drink too much. We never saw them when they were unhappy. And we never saw them bald. And what a wonderful thing 100 years from now, when we're all dead, was that Carlos died when he did, because that's forever. Yes?
There was this man who I assume was one of the most famous men in Mexico. And why did he do this?
Why?
All the trouble, and his wife too, as he was dead. Why did they make this incredible effort that they apparently always wanted to do?
That's called Mutual Admiration Society. We were great, great friends. I would have done the same thing for him. We were intimate friends for many, many years, and I don't think a situation like this will ever prevail again when a director has been a bullfighter, and he and the greatest bullfighter living in the world at that time collaborate to put him playing himself on the screen. And as far as bullfighting is concerned, they're worse than opera stars. They retire 1,000 times and they never want to quit. There's a wonderful line Juan Belmonte said many years ago in Spain. He said there would never be a bullfight if you signed the contract on the morning of the bullfight, because that's when you don't want to ever fight again. But the next day, all the girls are around and people are reading you the great triumph you had in the plaza, and it's an ego, a big ego trip. And also, as far as ladies are concerned, which is very interesting, race drivers have a tremendous attraction to women because they're very physical, and death is involved. It's 10 times more than that with bullfighters, because they see the bodies of the men. It's a very sexy thing, and here he is out dealing with death and being artistic about it. I said to this lady today, who asked great questions, I said, wouldn't it be an interesting thing to see Nuria be as graceful as he is with a bull? Because I love him alone on the stage. He's magnificent. But that's what people like Arruza, Manolete, and today, the great torero, there are a few left today. And the young man you saw with the cape, his son, who was practicing bullfighting, is now a great matador, Manolo Arruza. And if he weren't the son of Carlos Arruza, he'd be acknowledged as one of the best in the world. But everybody says, yeah, well, his dad was Abraham Lincoln. He's not as good as his pop, you know. And it's a tough cross to bear. But the answer is, they did it not because of me. They did it because they wanted to. You know? Yes?
Did you have a friendship or a relationship with Hemingway at all?
I met him 3 times and just loved him. And I met him when he was fantastic during the period of Blood and Sand, and I met him through Tyrone Power when I was teaching to look like a torero for the picture. I was 20 years old and in awe of Hemingway. And, you know, I've read everything he's written, and I love it. But only 3 times. Usually when people are dead and they can't say that's not true, authors will tell you, oh yeah, I was an intimate friend. We traveled all over Spain. I wish we had, but I didn't know that well. Yes?
What's the
13 years.
Is any of it sensation for
No, we shot it all. And what I did, because it'll never happen again, and you know, it's delightful to me that you all are still sitting here, because this is not your cup of tea, but I think you do appreciate it, or you still wouldn't be here. When you run this picture in a country that has bullfighting, you can't hear the soundtrack. It's just shocking. And 4 years ago, the Domecq family in Spain gave my wife and me what they call a homage for one solid week. It was just us. And they took over a hotel projection room and built a screen much bigger than this. And there were 3,000 people there. And we were sitting with Mrs. Arruza and the 3 kids you saw in the picture and the 2 little girls who were 2 and 3 when Carlos was killed. And they'd never seen their father. And her father had never been discussed because their mother had remarried. And they didn't know anything about their dad. And when the lights came up, they had just dissolved. You know, this is their dad. And it was one of the most emotional moments I've ever had in my life. But 13 years, I shot all during the renowned pictures. I'd shoot a bullfight. I shot 18 bullfights for that little montage. Went to Mexico to make the picture. Thought that it would take 6 months, which it should have. Deborah and I arrived there on Saturday. There was a motion picture strike on Sunday. Now, you know, in Mexico, they don't want to work anyway. They're having a good time. So when they have a strike, this is a great opportunity to never work again. So I didn't know if they'd ever let us make pictures. And I stayed. By that time, I was determined I was going to make the picture. And the wonderful thing was, here I'd had everything in the world I wanted in Hollywood. And the best review I ever got in my life was from the communist newspaper in Mexico City, because they figured I was one of them, because I didn't have money for a taxi, I didn't have any way to get around, and they said, this is the way to make pictures, because here is a man that believes what we believe, and it was a magnificent review, and I have it at home. And at the end of the time, when we finally finished the picture, I would walk down the street still dead broke, because all my money was in here. You see, when you're successful in Hollywood, it wasn't the money that I invested, which was nearly $500,000. And I said it with humility, not with bragging, because it's pretty stupid to put all that money in your own picture. But it was the 7 years I didn't make a nickel, just nothing. So you had 7 times what I made every year in Hollywood, which was quite substantial. This is a very expensive picture, and it's the only one that I really, really care about, because I think all the other ones are in the future, the good ones. But this will never be duplicated. I don't think it ever can be. Yes, excuse me, you had a question. Yes.
Can you say something about what they're doing?
Well, this year we hope to make a picture called Khalifa, which is the story of Mary and me collecting our herd of really priceless horses. Because I knew when I came back from this picture they weren't going to ask me to direct in the United States for a long, long time. They had a whole new group making pictures, attorneys, doctors, lawyers, everybody but picture makers, and a few people who made gold records. And there was no place for me, so I said to Mary, you know, you're very lucky in life if you have one thing you do well, and I hoped I made good pictures. And I said, I'm very fortunate because I was raised on horses. And as a matter of fact, when I was 19, I knew I was the world's greatest horseman because I'd been trained to be. And I saw horseback, and I went back to the hotel, and I was embarrassed because I knew I didn't know a damn thing. I wasn't sure you got on the left side or the right side. I had to go back and think about it because I'd never seen horsebacking like this. So we pooled our money. Mrs. Boetticher put in a great deal more than I did because I was nearly broken. We went to Portugal and Spain and picked up horses and wrote screenplays and a book. And the book is an exciting book because it's the 7 years in Mexico. Not the making of the picture, but when I finally went there and lost everything. And I think I'm the only person in the world who ever went from a new white Rolls Royce, which I only bought for Carlos to have some class, because he and Howard Hughes were the only people in the world who wore brown shoes or sneakers with a tuxedo, you know. And you had to say, that isn't what you do. So I bought a beautiful Rolls Royce, and I ended up in a second-class bus with the chickens going to the toilet on my shoulders. And it was a tough 7 years, so I wrote a book And the title is from Shakespeare's 29th sonnet, which is, "When in disgrace with fortune in man's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state." And it's the story of those 7 years down. And I was in prison. I finally got to the point where the president of Mexico, Cortines, said, "Unless Mr. Boetticher assassinates me, don't cause him any more trouble." At the end of the picture, when it was finished and Mexico knew it was finished, the taxi drivers would stop me if it were drizzling and say, "I don't know Senor Boetticher, I'm going to the Hilton." I said, "I don't have any money." It's no important. Come in and they drive me to the Hilton. And you know, I've said this several times before, and it was so important to me because I was a spoiled brat when I was young. I became a director much too quick with no talent. Any talent that I have, I developed from experience in making terrible mistakes. And when you're broke in your early 20s or late teens, you can always rationalize it and say, "Well, what the hell, I'm just a kid." But when you've made a great deal of money and have been fairly successful, and then you're dead broke, moving always in a foreign country, you make up your mind it's never going to happen again, and you grow up. So I think that the best pictures are in the future. Khalifa, this story, I'm going to make the book. A very substantial option was just taken out by Leon Chulik, first by Peter Bogdanovich, who's a close friend of mine. And Mr. Alexander doesn't know this, but Leon Chulik, who really saved Coppola when he was making Apocalypse, another producer friend of mine, just upped the option, and Peter gave it up, and we're going to make that book, which will be a screenplay. I'll do that in about 2 years. And then a very exciting picture called A Horse for Mr. Barnum to be made in Spain next year. And now I'm just finishing a screenplay now called Feather Nest about my youth, which was comparatively exciting too, where my father always said to me, "We'll feather your nest as long as Mother and I live, but you live by the rules." And the rules were, if he said the moon's made out of green cheese, he was a real German. You stand up and say, "Yes, sir," or go to your room, because I always went to my room. And your mother never tells anything but the truth. My mother never told anything that was truthful. And it's she was a gorgeous lady, but she maneuvered everybody, and it's a story of up to where I got in the motion picture business. As a matter of fact, the end of the screenplay is the young man and his fiancée reach hands and look up, and it says in the studio, Duncan Eberly Studios. It was really Hal Roach Studios, and they take their first step into the future, and it doesn't have anything to do with motion picture business. And those are 5 pictures. Well, there's another one called When There's Something Western Talk to Do about the end of the revolution in Mexico, where the people in this country have never been aware of the fact that the Germans were financing all the raids on the United States by men like Pancho Villa to keep Blackjack General Pershing busy on the border in Texas rather than go to Europe and win the war, which ultimately they did. So those are the next 5 years, I hope. Yes?
Not quite part of the comment that it's true to the movie that I don't know the movie at all. I was confused about it. And I was watching the movie and I got a feel for what it was all about for bullfighting. I really got into it. I really noticed the people who were proud of their cheering the whole way, the whole thing. I have no idea what's going on and why they do that. And to me, that's story reality, but yet your movie conveyed the impression that there was a lot of love, a lot of ego between the crowd and the bullfighter. And that's you're supposed to make in the movie.
Well, thank you so much. That's what we set out to do, and that's a much bigger compliment than somebody who understood bullfighting and said, "Gee, it's great," because they all say that. But that's really why we make pictures, and that's why you get a tear in your eye when you hear something that nice. Thank you very much.
There was a great shot there where you had it looked like dirt house where the camera was a real old shot. How did you do that?
Oh no, we were underneath the bull ring, and it was very funny. That's concrete back there. It's called a callejon. And I came in and I had Carlos under contract. And, you know, he had to do what I wanted. And he did. And the impresario, the impresario of the bull ring came around and we were digging with pickaxes a 6-foot square hole underneath the bull ring so that we could shoot up. And he came in and he said, "Senor Boetticher, you can't dig a hole in the biggest bull ring in the world. And Carlos said, "But don't dig, I don't fight." The guy grabbed the shovel and helped us finish the hole. But you know the step around the ring so that the smaller fellas, when they're in a hurry to get over the fence, can jump? We were underneath one of those steps so you couldn't see the camera, and we just took out that bottom board.
That was very effective.
I thought it was. I liked those shots very much. And the interesting shots to me were the high shots, because I put a crane out from the very top of the ring, and that's like 10 stories in the air, and put my cameraman out there, and he thought that I wanted a gigantic shot. And I said, zoom in to the end of your zoom. He said, "Why?" I said, "I don't give a damn. I've got the shot of all the people. I want to see what bullfighting in the ring is really like. You're not in there with the crowd. Your enemy is the bull, and there's nobody else there. And you might as well be on the Sahara Desert, and that's what I want to see." And the first time you see that, especially in Mexico, nobody'd ever seen that angle before. It was a real shock because it's very lonesome out there. Yes. Well, I want to thank you all for coming. It's been an absolute delight. And Gilbert Rowland, and probably the two best performances I ever directed. So if an actor's really smart and you can get a fairly good director to really hate his guts, maybe the director will work so hard to make him eat crow that he'll give a good performance, which is exactly what happened. Tony and I met on Blood and Sand, and he ended up with Rita Hayworth, when Tyrone was killed. And I came to Hollywood to teach Tyrone Power how to be a bullfighter in Blood and Sand. Not because I was a talented bullfighter, but I was the only one in Mexico who could speak English and fight bulls at the same time. So that was a great entree to Hollywood. And briefly, then it was an off season, and I was going back to become a former matador. And from my athletic career, which was pretty good until I got hurt, and my bullfighting career, which fascinated everybody in Hollywood, I got a job at Hal Roach Studios as a messenger boy. And I never got to deliver letters. It was a wonderful break because I'd go in all these big producers' office and they'd say, "Don't leave the letter, sit down. Listen, when in the Notre Dame game, is it really true that all you do to make a bull mad is open the door?" And pretty soon I knew everybody, and they began to promote me. Not that I had any talent, but I'd tell them stories. And the true stories, and that's how I really got started in Hollywood. And then I decided that I'd stay in the next most dangerous business, the motion picture business. So Tony, then we have done 6 pictures together. And it's very interesting because the only piece of jewelry I've ever been able to keep is an 1804 Guadalupe. I'm Presbyterian. I'm the only Presbyterian in the world who ever killed a bull. And it says, she's the Virgin of bullfighting in Mexico. And it says here, "For Bud, may she watch over you always, Tony." And I've lost this thing twice in the ocean. And that's why I have a little chain now, because it's soldered on. And if I lost it now, I'd walk home. I'd be afraid to get the taxi. I'm really superstitious about this thing. And Tony gave me that after Magnificent Matador. And Magnificent Matador wasn't that good a picture, but it made him a star. What it did for Tony, he wasn't Zapata's brother anymore. He wasn't Gauguin opposite Van Gogh, Kirk Douglas. He was himself playing a bullfighter in a picture, and I wrote the screenplay for him, specifically to make him a star. And after that, he was. And I had a tremendous problem because they wouldn't let the big leading ladies work with him because they said, "Who are Ava Gardner and Lana Turner? Who are their co-stars?" And I said to the agent, "Well, Clark Gable, Cary Grant, Gary Cooper." And they said, "Yeah, well, suppose they act with this Mexican friend of yours and it lays a bomb and we find out they're not worth their big salary and big percentage." And I discovered that this great lady, Maureen O'Hara, who's the finest pro I ever worked with as far as girls are concerned, had an affinity for Tony. So when you're a director and you tell Tony the bullfight story, you tell about the bullfighter. And when you tell Maureen the bullfight story, you tell about the richest girl in the world who buys herself a lover. And she sat and she listened to the thing and she said, "Ian, who's going to be the leading man?" And I said, "Anthony Quinn." She said, "Ah, nice, I've always wanted to do something for the boy." So That's how he got the job, and of course after that, look what happened. It just gave him the opportunity to be Anthony Quinn. Yes?
There's something about the bullfight in the lady about doing the bullfight scene with actors that having to use doubles or something.
Oh, you bet you used doubles.
Is it true that John Ford did editing on that film or something?
Yes, he did. And I must tell all you John Ford fans, because I loved him, he cut out an awful lot of good stuff. But I'll answer both your questions. As far as Bullfighter and the Lady was concerned, we had all the top bullfighters in Mexico in the picture. And I've always done this, because actors shouldn't have the talent, and they shouldn't be allowed to do these things. So consequently, if you'll notice, when Gilbert Rowland is met the first time, all the bullfighters you've seen in the titles up close, and you can recognize them, are pulling out his chair and lighting his cigarettes. I did the same thing in a rodeo picture. It starts out with Casey Tibbs, and you find out he's not as good as John Lund, and you just saw him the greatest bronco rider in the world. And he says to John Lund, thank goodness you've got a broken leg. Maybe today I can get first place. You know, and if you can do that and surround your people with real pros, for instance, in Bullfighter and the Lady, Bob Stack and I are on the way to Arruza's ranch, and we hear blam, blam, blam. And this is before the picture started. And he said, boy, I missed that. And I said, miss what? And he said, are you kidding? And I said, no, what was that? He said, they're shooting skeet over there, someplace in the mountains. And I said, do you shoot? And he said, yeah. And I said, are you any good? And he said, yeah. I said, how good? He said, I'm the world's champion. Wow! Right in the picture. Pretty soon he's shooting skeet. The funny thing was, the day we shot, he hit a double, and Gilbert Rowland hit a double. He'd never shot before in his life, and Bob couldn't hit his hat. He was so nervous. But that's what we used, because it was such a professional thing to do. When you can find out what an actor can do, let him do it. Now, naturally, we doubled him in the bull ring. And the young man who did him was a great matador who had gotten in fight with the top of Presa in Mexico City. Everybody does. Dr. Gauna, who's the world's champion schmuck, if you know that word. And he had gotten in a fight with him over a girl, and he had boycotted Luis Briones from bullfighting. The kid couldn't get a job, so I hated Gauna, so I said, I'll get you a job. So I put him in, and he dyed his hair blonde, and we dyed Bob Steck's hair blonde to look even more American than he was. And when he started the bullfight with these great 610 kilos bulls, the biggest bulls they'd seen in Mexico in years, the audience started yelling to him and saying, oh, hey, Luis, keep your hair blonde, you're sensational. So that's what we did throughout the picture. And Bob, we had a very funny thing with him. I told him, I said, you know, I'll never ask any actor to do, you know, something that I can't do. And he took me at my word. And he got all the way in a Tienta ring in Mexico before he remembered that, you know, I'd been a professional. And so it was too late by this time, and he really worked hard, and he was very, very good. We call it Toreo de Salon, bullfighting in the living room, because you learn to be a ballet artist, and then when the book comes in, you don't think, now this is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 for your Veronica. It has to be automatic, or you're really in trouble. You can't stop and do it by the numbers. So you practice and practice and practice that way, as you do on horseback with the apparatus. So Bob stood out, and Arruza was behind the bull here. This is the big bull in Plaza, Mexico. He stood out, and he was to put his feet in the hat and stand, and I was over here. So we called the bull. Now, all Bob had to do, because he was going to be close to the bulladero where he could go, hey, hey, and call the bull, and then drop the mullet and run like hell. All I wanted was the two of them in the shot. And there's no way he's going to get hit. You know, I mean, I love the guy. This is absurd. And, you know, people like Gilbert Rowland said the reason I love him so much, he went back and told everybody in Hollywood he did his own bullfighting. You know. So at any rate, Stack, that was the end of our friendship. So Stack stood out there, and it was beautiful. You've got to see this. It shows what a soundtrack can do. He stood like this to make the press a little worth it, and he went, hey. And Bill was over there, and I'm over here, and I said, Bob, come on, some guts, and louder. So he went, hey, and the bull went, woo! And he went, ah! And he jumped the fence and he said, Jesus Christ, I didn't know they honked. It was beautiful, and he's told the story a million times. He said he wasn't afraid of the bull, but when the bull made that noise, he said, I don't believe what I'm doing here. So, the answer to the question is, of course they were doubled, and they always would be doubled. Yes?
In Arruza and the Randolph Scott movies, I think the biggest point was the believability that you put into them. Now, in Ragtime, the focal point of the whole picture was at the unreliable firehouse. Now, anybody with half a mind knows that in 1900, the unreliable firehouse would be full of mix with such a thick rope you couldn't understand them. But not in Ragtime, and this is nominated for Academy Award. Do you believe you would have ever let such a thing by?
Well, I know I wouldn't have. And that's why I said I never have made a picture since I was a technical director where I ever had a technical director telling me what to do, because they do seem to feel that the pictures I make are honest, which makes me very happy because they're set out to be honest. And they have some very misconstrued ideas of why I do things in the Scott picture. They always think it has something to do with Catholicism. I was telling, when I burned the hang tree in Ride Lonesome, I went to the British Film Institute with my wife, and they were charming. And the kids had done theses on my work. And there was great young men and women, and they had all their notes out. And they would say, Mr. Boetticher, we noticed that the wonderful thing you did, which, you know, you're a Catholic, aren't you? I said, no, I'm not a very devout Presbyterian. Well, they cuss us out. And they said, well, when you, wasn't that the cross? Wasn't that the burning cross? And I said, no. That was a hang tree that he burned down because that's where his wife was hung and he didn't want to see it anymore. Oh, and the other fellow said, well, I knew that, but he said, you know, when at the opening of Comanche Station, when all those Indians are surrounding Randolph Scott, the circle of the Indians, that was the bull ring, wasn't it? And Randolph Scott was the matador. And I said, no. And he said, well, what do you mean, no? I said, it was a cowboy in a hell of a lot of trouble. So I ruined their whole senior year. But we do try to be authentic. And I know my bullfight pictures are authentic because I lived that. And you can't have lived the Westerns, but I want to tell you a story I've never told anybody, and you'll love this to show you how phony the authentic people are. I wanted to make a picture about the Coffeyville raid. It was Audie Murphy's second picture. It was called, remember my pictures at Universal were very good. We don't make good pictures. But, you know, I said a long time ago, any studio that makes its money showing everybody in the world how we make pictures has to be bad to the industry, and they've done a hell of a job in ruining that. So at any rate, I wanted to know about the Coffeyville raid with the Daltons and all the boys, and I went to Coffeyville, and there were three wonderful old men. They were really, really old. They could hardly move, and they told me, they were there, they were kids. You know, everybody's always there if you live long enough. Where they were there now, I'll never know, but they were there, and they told me exactly how it happened. And Brad came in this way, and the other one came in that way, and I put all this down. I was going to go back to Universal and make the Coffeyville raid the way it really was. I spent a lot of money to find this out, which is really going to be the answer to your question. So I got on the set, and they all came down, and they showed me what I had to shoot. It didn't look like Coffeyville. Nothing worked. And I said, well, that's not the way it was. And they said, well, Bud, we can't destroy the whole back lot because you went there and found out what really happened. So I said, okay, so I had lived the whole thing. And I got a medal from the Coffeyville Chamber of Commerce for being the most authentic director of Westerns in the history of the United States. And it was completely phony. But I'll bet it was the way these old men remembered it when they saw it on the screen. So I took the medal. So, yes.
During the shooting when you did the Randolph Scott film, you did some TV work. That is unacceptable to us to see on TV.
Well, thank goodness.
I'm just wondering if there was anything there.
They came to me at Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers, they weren't doing anything. And they wanted to make a TV series called Maverick. And they asked me if I would direct the pilot. Now, the only things that I have done
have been pilots. It's not a director's medium. And you can take all the time you want, and then you give it to some poor guy who's second. They give him a week to do an hour show, and there's no way he can top you. But if you make the pilots, you can do pretty well. So it's interesting how James Garner came about. I was walking down the street one day on the way to the Blue Room, and I ran into Jack Warner with his entourage, and he's livid. And he said, "Bud, come with me. I want to show you the biggest disgrace. You won't believe it." And Josh Logan, who is a great stage director, was doing a picture called Sayonara. And Brando was in the pictures, you all remember. And so we walked in the projection room. Now, it's, 9 minutes, real runs, 1,000 feet. Color, 25 cents, $1.25, and it's going click, 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 and the money is going. And here, I won't go the 9 minutes. There was no cut, absolutely no cut. It's a scene of a fellow in a Navy Flyers uniform. I found out later was Garner. He was very much overweight, and Brando. And we all sat, and the lights went down, and Warner said, "Run it." And here's what we saw for 9 minutes. Josh, are we rolling? Yes, Marlon, we're rolling. Well, what's my line? Script girl's voice. Here they come now. Where do I look? Right over the fella's waving to you, Mr. Brando. Right. Well, quiet. I can't act if a guy's gonna stand over, get him off the bridge. So this other fella's standing there, and Brando, it's all rolling. And Warner's going, "I don't believe it," nobody's saying cut. "Are we still rolling, Josh?" "Yes, Marlon, we're still rolling. Anytime you're ready on it." So he says, "What's your line, Jim?" Jim says, I know, I'm fine, Marlon. Here she comes now, and I'm going to tell you who she is. "Oh, yeah, okay. Still rolling, we're still rolling." This went on. Lights came up, they never got the scene. I said, "There's Maverick." He said, "Brando, I wouldn't have that SOB on the line." I said, "No, not Brando, the other guy." And that's how Garner got the part. Well, he heard how I got the part, because I loved it. He's standing there going, "I don't believe you. I know my line. I love his sense of humor." So he came back, and he weighed about 240 pounds, and I said, "Jim, you're going to have to get in shape." So we went to the gym every day, and we worked out, and he got to where he became James Garner. So that was a pilot. And the only other television I did a couple of television shows that needed to be saved. I liked Rod Taylor very much, and they were going to drop Hong Kong. So I did the last one, and there was a karate thing in there, and it was a big hit, and they picked up the series for another year. Now, the only other thing I did, and I loved it more than anything else, I got a call one day, and a voice said, and I thought he was kidding. I've never met him. He said, "Mr. Boetticher?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm Dick Powell." And I said, "How are you, Mr. Powell?" Having listened to him sing and watched him shoot for years, after he stopped singing and really became a star. And he would have his own great theater at Republic. And he said, "I want to ask you a great favor." He said, "I am not too well, and I have to do 4 of the half-hour shows, Westerns. I have to appear in 4 of them personally, and I would like you to direct them." And I said, "Mr. Powell, how much do I have to pay you for that honor?" And so I did those 4, and they were the last things that he did. But that's all I did. I've never done this television. So.
But how do you relate a film like Arruza to the Randolph Scott Western?
I don't at all. Everybody else does. And I think, no, and I don't mean that the way that, I didn't. But obviously, the people who write about those shows are smarter than I am. I haven't seen Lake's Diamond till tonight, after I saw it at the premiere. I never saw it again. I wouldn't dare watch it on television. It was such an unhappy show. And I sat back there and loved it like somebody else did it. And that's wonderful. I said to my wife, "This isn't bad at all." They're great. Wow. And I can see Arruza, and I cry a little, and I feel bad about it, and I love it. And I can, 7 Men From Now knocks me out. And I guess you're so self-conscious when you're younger that if you do something that's pretty good, you don't dare let people think you like it. Well, I'm delighted somebody likes it, and I'm going to join them, because I saw a couple of pictures that I've been here I like very much. Now I have to go out and talk them. But I didn't. I guess you relate because
they're the same kind of people. You know, Arruza, I'll tell you one funny story about Arruza and Dora. I can't want to get up on this
Being here with you because you're also enthusiastic and kind. Carlos,
I was saying the other day, if he'd wanted to be a brain surgeon,
he'd have been one of the best in the world. And he couldn't play chopsticks on the piano. Yeah, he just couldn't do it. So he hired the top conductor in Mexico and spent a fortune. And he learned to play La Virgen de la Macarena perfectly, like Arruza. You know, he took him a year. And it's the great piece they play 5 minutes before the bullfight that goes boom, boom, da 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 da, boom, 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 boom. And he would stand next to the piano at all big parties. He'd park there. And the girls would flock anyway. And they would say, do you play the piano? No, I don't play the piano. Well, you seem to like music. Well, do you play at all? No, I don't do things unless I can do them well. Do you play? Well, he says, so they talked him into it. Now, if they didn't talk him into it, I always had a couple of guys who worked for him that would come over and say, Carlos, play Macarena, you know. And he would sit down at the piano and kill everybody. He was brilliant. Boom, boom, da 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 da, boom, 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 boom. And they'd say, wow. And he'd say, that's all, I can't play anymore. I don't see, you know, because he couldn't. And they would say, my God, the man's the greatest bullfighter. Did you hear him play the piano? You know, that was Arruza. He just knocked me out. So, yes. Pardon me? I knew him briefly. I met him 3 times. And I met him under very good circumstances because I met him when I was teaching Tyrone Power how to be a bullfighter. And I met him at the best time of his life, and I'm a great admirer of Hemingway. And I understand that I was very lucky not to have met him the last few years. And then I read the books by the intimate friends of his like Hotchner, and you know they didn't even know each other. And I get disgusted because he was a fantastic man. And I loved it. But Death in the Afternoon was a very prejudiced book. Hemingway said a brilliant thing, as anybody who studies bullfighting. He said, I have been in Spain 10 years studying bullfighting, and I now know that if I don't write the book now, after the 10 years that I've learned and I still know nothing about it, I'll never have guts enough to start the book. And that's what bullfighting is all about. And he wrote a great book, but he didn't like Domingo Ortega because they got in an argument about a girl, and he just dismissed him, and during that period, Ortega was the top torero in the world. And he has, if you'll notice at the end of the book, there is a chapter dedicated to Sidney Franklin that says, my opinion of Sidney Franklin as a matador de toros. And the reason that's in there, and he's not mentioned in the book, is because Franklin did the glossary and all the translations for him, because the only thing in the world Sidney didn't do well was fight bulls. He was a great artist and a great raconteur and spoke Spanish with any accent wherever he wanted to be. And he's the only man in the world I ever kicked out of my own house, and it was my own fault because I did the Mexican thing. I met him in Tijuana to see if he was for real. He was very brave. And I said, mi casa su casa, and he showed up and spent a week with me. And I couldn't believe it because he was a brilliant man and he knew everything. And Hemingway said he knew everything, and he did. You would say, Sidney, what would you like for breakfast? And he would say, I'll have 2 scrambled eggs. And speaking of eggs, do you know that the white leghorn is the greatest egg layer in the world? There are 2,748,000 in Rhode Island alone. And I'd go and I'd look it up, and he was right, you know. And he would say, speaking of nuclear fission, and he would invent the atomic bomb. And I'd go, I couldn't understand. I'd look it up, and the son of a gun was right. And I finally said, out! I couldn't take him anymore. So, you know, I loved Hemingway, yes. So, yes. I couldn't hear it all. Which what? The actor. I'm getting a kickback from this thing. Which actor gave the best performance? probably would say Ray Danton, reluctantly. And then second, it kills me, I would probably say Gilbert Roland. Well, we got a big on those two pictures. And it's their own problem what happened to them. But they were wonderful in this show. And I think that, I think Tony Gwynn is brilliant, and I love him. And I think the best actor I worked with as an actor, and he didn't have the opportunity in the picture I made to be anything but a walk-on, really, was Van Heflin, who was a real pro in Wings of the Hawk. This could be to live with him. He never his talent, but it's like saying, if I had made a big picture with Spencer Tracy, I would have said the best actor I ever worked with was Spencer Tracy, but that wouldn't have been one of his good pictures. So, anything else? Thank all of you very, very much for coming out.